What if the secret to surviving the harshest winters on Earth has nothing to do with modern technology, but everything to do with a handful of ancient foods that last for years without refrigeration? For centuries, Mongolian nomads have mastered the art of preservation so completely that their food traditions have outlasted empires, crossed continents, and fed armies on the move. Today, we are counting down 20 foods that Mongolian households stockpile, foods that never expire, and the specific practical methods behind each one. Number 20. Rule. If you ask any Mongolian grandmother what one food she cannot live without, the answer is almost always rule. This is dried curd cheese, and it is the cornerstone of Mongolian food preservation. The process begins in summer when livestock are producing the most milk. Fresh milk, usually from a cow or mare, is gently heated, and a small amount of natural acidic culture from a previous batch is stirred in to encourage curdling. The resulting curds, called orom when skimmed fresh, are separated from the whey and pressed into molds made from wooden frames or simply shaped by hand into flat slabs, small cylinders, or decorative block shapes. These shaped curds are then placed on wooden racks or rooftops under direct sun and dry summer wind for anywhere from 2 weeks to an entire month. The Mongolian sun and low humidity do the work of a dehydrator without any machinery involved. The finished arul is rock hard, tooth-breakingly dense, and has a sharp, sour flavor. It will last for years stored in a cloth sack hanging inside the ger, where air circulates freely. Mongolian children carry pieces in their pockets like candy, gnawing on them throughout the day. And if arul represents the dairy side of Mongolian preservation, wait until you see what they do with fat itself. Number 19. Orom. Orom is clotted cream, and it sounds simple until you realize how Mongolian households use it as a long-term fat reserve. Whole milk is left to sit undisturbed in a shallow wooden or metal vessel overnight, or for up to a full day. The cream rises, and the gentle warmth of a ger interior, even in cooler months, causes a thick skin to form on the surface. This thick layer is carefully skimmed off using a flat wooden ladle and collected in a sealed container. To preserve it for longer periods, the collected orom is lightly salted and packed tightly into containers to eliminate air pockets. In colder months, the container is placed just outside the ger door, where freezing temperatures act as a natural deep freeze. In summer, the salt and dense fat content slow bacterial growth considerably. Orom made during the peak summer milking season can carry a household through lean autumn months. It is spread on bread, stirred into tea, or eaten alongside rule. The fat density is what makes it resistant to spoilage, since very little water remains in properly skimmed orom. What you eat next on this list is made from something most cultures throw away entirely. Number 18. Izgi. Izgi is what happens when Mongolian households refuse to waste a single drop of milk. After the curds have been separated from whey to make rule, the leftover whey is not discarded. Instead, it is poured into a pot and cooked over slow heat, stirring almost constantly until the remaining milk solids caramelize and the liquid evaporates completely. The result is a crumbly, golden brown to dark amber solid that tastes slightly sweet and nutty. Depending on how long the cook stirs and how high the heat gets, izgi can range from soft and fudgy to completely dry and granular. The drier the final product, the longer it stores. Fully dried izgi is packed into cloth bags or sealed wooden containers and stored in cool, dry corners of the ger or storage areas of a permanent home. Because virtually all moisture has been cooked out, it resists mold and fermentation naturally. Mongolian households keep izgi for months as a snack, a tea additive, or a dense energy food during travel. The next item on our list is not a solid food at all, but a liquid that somehow never seems to go bad. Number 17. Airag. Airag is fermented Mars milk, and it is arguably the most culturally significant beverage in all of Mongolian history. Producing airag for long-term keeping requires a specific vessel called a kukur, traditionally made from horse leather that has been cured, shaped, and hung in the ger. Fresh mare's milk is poured into the kukur, and a wooden stirring paddle called a balur is used to agitate the milk thousands of times per day, sometimes over 10,000 strokes according to household tradition. Wild yeasts and bacteria naturally present in the leather vessel and the environment, start fermentation within hours. The alcohol content rises gradually over days, landing between 1 and 3%, which is enough to inhibit most harmful bacteria. The acidic environment created by lactic acid fermentation further protects the liquid. When made in peak summer, arag can be stored in sealed leather or ceramic containers kept in the cool shade of a storage tent, and can remain drinkable for weeks. Some households reduce it further into a more concentrated sour liquid. The next food on this list is one that required the same animal that produces arag, but in a very different form. Number 16. Borts. Borts is dried meat, and the Mongolian method of making it is unlike anything in conventional food preservation. In late autumn, when temperatures drop below freezing, livestock are slaughtered in a process called the white month slaughter. The meat, usually from horses, cattle, or sheep, is cut into long strips following the natural grain of the muscle. These strips are not marinated, not salted, not smoked. They are simply hung outside in the freezing winter air using rope or wooden frames. Mongolia's dry, cold winds do everything. The combination of below-zero temperatures, extremely low humidity, and constant wind simultaneously freeze-dries the meat over several weeks. The resulting borts is almost weightless, completely rigid, and so thoroughly dehydrated that a single horse can be reduced to a volume of meat that fits inside a small container. Warriors on the move historically crumbled borts into boiling water to reconstitute a full meal. Properly made borts, kept in a sealed container away from moisture, can last for years. The next item is another preserved meat, but it uses a method that relies on fat instead of cold air. Number 15. Uts. Uts is a traditional Mongolian preserved mutton dish, where an entire sheep's back section, including the spine, ribs, and a thick layer of tail fat, is kept largely intact. After slaughter, the uts portion is salted along the cut surfaces and any exposed meat areas. It is then hung or placed in freezing outdoor temperatures through the winter months. The fat layer acts as a natural sealant, protecting the interior meat from air exposure. In a properly cold Mongolian winter, uts can hang outside for months and remain in excellent condition. Inside a household, the fat covering also slows the meat beneath from drying out too quickly. The piece is brought inside and carved from as needed throughout winter, with the remaining portion going back into the cold. This method is deeply tied to the Mongolian concept of Tsagawan Sar, the Lunar New Year celebration, where uts is a guest of honor at the table. The next food is not meat at all, but it has been keeping Mongolian households alive through brutal winters for a very long time. Number 14. Suivan noodles dried form. Most people know suivan as a cooked noodle dish, but fewer realize that the hand-pulled noodles themselves are prepared in bulk and thoroughly dried for long-term storage. Mongolian households make the dough from flour, water, and a small amount of salt, rolling it thin and cutting it into noodle strips by hand. These raw noodles are then draped over wooden rods or laid flat on clean cloth in direct sunlight and dry wind. Within 1 to 2 days in summer conditions, they become completely brittle and bone dry. Stored in cloth sacks or sealed containers away from moisture, the dried noodles can last for a year or longer. Mongolian nomadic families traveling between seasonal pastures, called nutag, would carry dried noodle supplies in their carts along with dried meat and dairy. The noodles cook quickly when dropped into boiling broth, making them practical for camp cooking during migrations. The next item on this list is something Mongolians have been drinking and preserving for generations, but it begins not as a food, but as a byproduct. Number 13. Shimianarki. Shimianarki is a distilled milk spirit, and the preservation method here is distillation itself. Irag that has been fermenting for several days is poured into a traditional copper or iron pot called a Khailmag distillation rig. A bowl of cold water is placed on top, and a curved pipe or hollowed wooden tube channels the condensed steam into a collecting vessel below. The alcohol-rich vapor condenses against the cold surface and drips out as a clear liquid with a sharp, sour smell and a potent kick. Mongolian households distill arki in small batches, and the finished spirit, typically between 15 and 20% alcohol depending on the number of passes through distillation, is stored in sealed glass bottles, ceramic jugs, or tightly stoppered containers. The alcohol content makes it essentially self-preserving. A well-sealed bottle of Shiminarki can last for years. It is given to guests as a gesture of deep respect and offered during ceremonies. Just ahead, we move to one of the most uniquely Mongolian preservation traditions involving animal fat in a very specific way. Number 12. Chartreuse. Chartreuse is clarified butter, the Mongolian equivalent of ghee, and it is made specifically to last through the long winter months when fresh dairy is unavailable. Mongol households collect raw butter skimmed from fermented milk over several weeks of summer. This butter is then gently melted in a heavy pot over low heat. As it liquefies, white foam rises to the top and milk solids sink to the bottom. Both are carefully removed, leaving behind a pure golden liquid fat. This clarified butter is then poured hot into sealed leather bags or ceramic containers. The heat of the liquid creates a partial vacuum as it cools and contracts, helping seal the container naturally. Stored in a cool, dark place, chartreuse resists rancidity for many months. The absence of water and milk solids removes the two main vectors for bacterial growth and oxidation. Mongolian families spread it on bread, stir it into tea, and use it as a cooking fat throughout winter. What comes next is a preserved food that most outsiders find completely unexpected in a landlocked nomadic culture. Number 11. Dried wild onions and herbs. Mongolia's steppe is not barren. Wild onions called mangir, along with various medicinal herbs and edible grasses, grow across the landscape every summer. Mongolian households, particularly in rural areas, harvest these plants in late spring and early summer when they are most potent. The mangir bulbs are separated, cleaned, and left whole or cut in half lengthwise before being spread on clean cloth or wooden racks in full sun. The drying process takes roughly a week in peak summer heat. Herbs like wild thyme and various steppe plants are bundled and hung upside down from the interior wooden frame of the gear, called the tuno support structure, where rising warm air from the central stove accelerates drying. Fully dried mangir and herbs are stored in cloth pouches or small wooden boxes. They rehydrate quickly in soup or stew and add both flavor and nutrition. The next food sounds completely ordinary until you hear how Mongolians preserve it to last through multiple winters. Number 10. Ulbuv cookies. Ulbuv are traditional Mongolian fried cookies shaped in carved wooden molds to create patterns representing good fortune. To make them last, Mongolian households mix flour, fat, and sometimes a small amount of sugar into a firm, low-moisture dough. The cookies are pressed into carved molds called toivon to create their distinctive patterns and then deep-fried in animal fat until completely golden and firm. The frying process drives out almost all internal moisture, and the dense fat content inhibits mold growth. After frying, ulbuv are stacked into tower formations and left exposed to cool, dry air for days, creating an even harder exterior. These towers are displayed during Sagan Sar and can sit at room temperature for weeks in winter without spoiling. In the dry Mongolian winter air, they harden further and can keep for months. The next item might be the most ancient preservation technique on this entire countdown. Number 9. Frozen meat stored underground or in snow. Long before refrigeration existed, Mongolian households in regions with severe winters used permafrost or deep snow as a natural freezer. After the autumn slaughter, large quantities of meat from horses, cattle, and sheep were wrapped in the clean stomach lining of the animal itself, or sewn into hide bags. These packages were buried in the frozen ground at depths of 1 to 2 meters, where temperatures remain consistently below zero throughout winter and often into early spring. In areas without permafrost, households packed meat tightly into snowdrifts on north-facing slopes where sunlight never reaches. The constant sub-zero temperature prevents microbial activity entirely, and the hide wrapping prevents freezer burn from wind exposure. Communities in regions like Kovskal in northern Mongolia still practice versions of this method today. The meat retrieved in spring is virtually identical to freshly slaughtered product. What comes next uses something you'd never expect as a preservation agent. Number 8. Salt-cured sheep stomach, sute, tsai ingredients. Mongolian households preserve the stomach, intestines, and organs of slaughtered animals using heavy salt packing. The organs are cleaned thoroughly and packed densely with coarse rock salt sourced from steppe salt lakes. the most well-known being Khailmag Nur and similar saline lake systems. The salted organs are folded, tied, and stored in cool corners of stone or earthen storage structures. Salt draws moisture out of the tissue through osmosis, creating an inhospitable environment for bacteria. Organs preserved this way can last through winter and into early spring without refrigeration. The preserved stomach lining is used as a cooking vessel in certain traditional recipes, and the intestines are used for sausage-style preparations. Every part of the animal is considered sacred and nothing is wasted, a philosophy rooted in Mongolian Buddhist and shamanistic traditions. Next up is something that blurs the line between food and medicine. Number 7. Tairag. Tairag is Mongolian yogurt, and while fresh tairag spoils quickly, Mongolian households extend its life through strategic fermentation management. A small amount of tairag from a previous batch, called the eklin, meaning starter, is kept and used to inoculate each new batch. The milk is warmed, the starter is stirred in, and the mixture is left wrapped in felt or placed near the stove to maintain warmth during initial fermentation. Once set, the tairag is moved to a cooler location where the cold temperature dramatically slows further fermentation and microbial activity. In winter, containers of tairag placed in unheated storage sections of a home remain stable for weeks. Some households dry tairag partially into a semi-solid state that stores even longer. The living bacterial culture in tairag was also understood by Mongolian households to settle digestion and support health during long periods of meat-heavy winter eating. The next food is one that takes patience, but rewards it with something extraordinary. Number 6. Kurut-style pressed dry milk cake variations. Mongolian households sometimes press whole milk solids into dense cake forms using stone weights placed over cloth-wrapped curds for 12 to 24 hours. The resulting blocks are dense, waxy, and extremely low in moisture. These blocks are then placed in direct sunlight for an additional week until the exterior forms a dry, protective skin. The dry skin seals the interior fat and protein matrix from air and humidity, stored stacked in a cool, shaded area wrapped in clean cloth. These milk cakes can last many months without any refrigeration. Families carve thin slices for tea time or crumble portions into hot broth. The slow pressing removes far more whey than standard curd handling, which is what gives these cakes their exceptional shelf stability. Just ahead, something that Mongolian warriors carried hidden on their person during the longest campaigns. Number 5. Animal blood sausage preserved in cold. Mongolian blood sausage, sometimes called chatsgor, is made immediately after slaughter by mixing fresh blood with fat, sometimes a small amount of grain, and salt before stuffing the mixture into cleaned intestine casings. The filled casings are tied at intervals and boiled until fully cooked through. They are then hung outside in freezing winter air to firm and dry over several days. The combined effect of thorough cooking, high salt content, and subsequent freeze-drying creates a product that resists spoilage for weeks in cold conditions, and can be sliced and reheated directly from frozen storage. Households store these outside, hanging from gyre frame extensions, or in shaded outdoor storage through winter. Nothing from the slaughter goes unused, and the blood sausage represents a peak moment in whole animal Mongolian butchery tradition. What comes next is perhaps the most meditative food preservation practice on this list. Number 4. Sun-dried wild berries and fruits. The Mongolian steppe and its forest-steppe transition zones produce wild berries including sea buckthorn, called chatsargana, and various small wild fruits in summer. Mongolian households gather these berries in late summer when sugar content is highest. They spread them in thin single layers on flat stones, wooden boards, or clean cloth elevated above the ground for air circulation. The berries dry in direct sun for 1 to 3 weeks depending on humidity and temperature. Fully dried chatsargana shrivel into small, intensely sour, nutrient-dense pieces. They are stored in cloth bags or sealed earthenware pots in cool, dark storage. The high natural acid and sugar content of the dried berries makes them remarkably resistant to mold. They are eaten as snacks, steeped into teas, or rehydrated in water and added to dairy preparations. Coming up, the preservation technique that doubled as a cultural ceremony. Number 3. Fermented grain preparations, Samba style. While Mongolian culture is primarily pastoral, roasted barley flour called samba in regions influenced by Tibetan Buddhist traditions crosses into the Mongolian diet, particularly among southern and western communities. Barley grains are dry roasted in a heavy iron pot over an open fire, stirred continuously until evenly browned and aromatic. The roasting process removes virtually all moisture and creates a mild reacted protective layer on each grain. The roasted grain is then stone ground into flour and stored in tightly sealed leather bags or wooden chests. Because the grain has been fully roasted and all moisture eliminated, it resists insect damage, mold, and rancidity for well over a year. Mongolian travelers mix samba with tea and a small amount of butter to create a quick, calorie-dense paste that requires no cooking. Number 2 is something that ties every item on this list together in a single, remarkable tradition. Number 2, gear-stored provision system. The Mongolian gear itself functions as a preservation system. The specific placement of food inside a gear follows a traditional spatial logic. Items requiring coolest conditions are stored on the north side near the back of the structure, which receives the least direct warmth from the central stove. Dairy items are hung high where circulating dry warm air from the tuono, the central crown opening, continuously moves across them. Dried meats hang from the wooden lattice walls called khana, near the door where ventilation is strongest. Each season, household members rotate provisions systematically, consuming oldest stores first and replenishing with each seasonal harvest. The entire gear is oriented and managed with preservation in mind. This is not accidental. It is a system refined over centuries of nomadic life across the most extreme climate on Earth. And now, the number one food Mongolian households have stockpiled for longer than recorded history. Number 1. Whole dried milk skin, Khailmag base. The ultimate long-term Mongolian food store is a combination of dried milk skin, fat, and curd components, layered and compressed into a unified brick that households treat almost like a savings account. The top cream layer, called orom, is collected daily through summer. This cream is slowly cooked with butter into a rich, dense preparation called Khailmag, a sweet, fudgy cream and fat preparation, cooked with flour until it solidifies on cooling. The solidified Khailmag is pressed into molds, cooled completely, wrapped in clean cloth or leather, and stored in the coldest section of the storage area. The fat content is so high and the moisture so low that properly made Khailmag and its compressed milk fat variants can remain edible for many months, sometimes approaching a full year in cold conditions. It is served during the most important Mongolian celebrations and represents prosperity, generosity, and survival wisdom accumulated across generations of life on the steppe. Mongolian food preservation is not primitive. It is precise, practical, and built from an intimate understanding of climate, biology, and the full potential of every animal and plant the steppe provides. These 20 foods have kept Mongolian households alive, healthy, and moving across the world's most extreme landscape for thousands of years. The wisdom is still here, and it still works.